Great traps in Dungeons & Dragons are extremely hard to design and probably even harder to run. I know that to this day, I often choose not to run traps designed by others, unless I'm completely certain of the role they were meant to play in the narrative of the adventure. However, when I run too many sessions in a row where the players don't run into a trap of any kind, I feel like something is missing. Traps are poorly described in most editions of the Dungeon Master Guide. They're not very well understood by most GMs, and still, they remain an iconic part of the D&D experience. By learning how to design engaging and memorable traps for your games, you are adding another great tool to your DMing kit. Your dungeons will no longer be an endless boring sequence of fights. But why do we use traps in the first place? Simply put, they're one of the hallmarks of action-adventure fiction. Most movies that inspire us when we sit down to prepare our next session feature at least some use of traps. They're also a mainstay of the video games that influence us when we wonder what would be fun to experience at the table with our players. In this video, we'll focus on the use of traps as standalone encounters. Of course, you can use traps as part of combat encounters as well, but there you can simply treat them as another ability or spell at the disposal of your monsters. Traps are a great way to add tension to the exploration of a dangerous dungeon. In the language of the great book Hamlet's Hit Points, they can serve as a natural downbeat in the pacing of your session. It's also possible to use them as an upbeat if the characters detect the trap in time and manage to negate its negative effects. A good trap shows the party that the space they're exploring is dangerous. It can also provide the players with clues about who created the dungeon or perhaps who or what is currently inhabiting it. One thing you can do is to let the players automatically detect the first trap in your dungeon. This will fulfill two important tasks. It will send more careful players into a vigilant state of mind. It will also remove any sense of unfairness if a bolder party runs into a trap later on. You telegraphed the danger clearly and they ignored it after all. Whenever you're thinking about including a trap in your adventure, make sure to think about its place in the story. Why does it exist? Who put it there? Is it maintained by someone, and how? Some traps are the last line of defense for an ancient treasure by the architect of a tomb. Others are simply a warning mechanisms for a bunch of kobolds that have turned the cave complex into their lair. You should also consider the gameplay implications of the trap. Is it there to simply tax the player's resources? Is it meant to be a filter for one of the characters to show off their abilities? Is it there to make an upcoming combat encounter harder? I like to think of most dungeons as active crime scenes with multiple layers of activity. This is extremely important when it comes to properly telegraphing the danger traps pose. A skeleton of an adventure with its lower half missing is a clear indication that you don't want to fall into the lake that it was crawling away from. For the sake of discussion, let's break traps into three distinct categories. Traditional traps are exactly what they sound like. They are usually triggered by a pressure plate, some magical mechanism, or something else players aren't meant to notice ahead of time unless they were actively looking for it, and to give them a sense that the GM is being unfair. They are also the most popular type of trap. You can mitigate their negative effect on morale by limiting the amount of damage they do to the players. In most games, traps that kill you instantly aren't that fun. I avoid using traditional traps as a way to block the path forward in an adventure. It's always good to include alternate routes that provide a way around them. A great way to lessen their emotional sting is to add some treasure as a reward for beating the trap or suffering its damage. Perhaps the trap was there to protect some actual treasure, or you get the gems and magic items from a previous adventurer who didn't manage to survive it. Hazards are another type. They are obvious dangers the players must navigate. This can be a piranha-infested water pool, a steep ice-covered cliffside, or a Super Mario-style corridor with an obvious sequence of dangers. Hazards are a lot of fun. They will let some of the characters show off their athletics and acrobatics. Smarter players will come up with ingenious ways to navigate them without getting hurt. Never be afraid to add plenty of them as long as they fit with the backstory of the dungeon and how its use evolved over time. So, what are anti-traps? You step on a pressure plate, you hear a click. and absolutely nothing happens. Perhaps a sight on a pendulum swings from a slit in the wall. Perhaps some darts shoot out from tiny holes in the ceiling, but they are too old and their poison cover has dried out. Perhaps a spiked pit remained open and a dead body with some loot lays at the bottom. Anti-traps are basically traps as interior design or dungeon dressing. An anti-trap has already been triggered or has stopped functioning properly. This allows you to use the aesthetics and the storytelling aspects of a trap without taxing your player's resources. They add a sense of realism to the game by showing that even in a fantasy world, ancient dungeons don't have the best maintenance. They're also a great way to warn players of future traps and put them on edge. Great traps aren't enough for a great campaign. You also need the secret to easy world building. Find it in this video.